A plane carrying 107 people vanished over the Pacific Ocean in 1962. Only one group of witnesses may have seen it happen, and even they can't fully explain what they saw. Somewhere in the middle of that ocean, at night, the crew of an oil tanker looks up and sees the sky catch fire. A brilliant white flash, bright enough to light up the entire deck of their ship, cutting through hours of nothing but black water and stars. Then a reddish-orange glow spreading behind it, hanging in the air for a moment too long to be lightning. Then two burning objects, falling separately, trailing smoke, disappearing into black water, hundreds of miles from the nearest land. 5 men watched this happen. 5 separate crew members, on the same ship, at the same moment, all telling investigators the same story afterward, almost word for word. And about 90 minutes earlier, that same plane, 93 of the 107 people on board were United States soldiers, on their way to a war most Americans hadn't even started paying attention to yet, had made a routine radio call from almost that same spot in the sky. That plane never checked in again. What the tanker crew saw that night in March of 1962 might be the only human eyes that ever witnessed the final moment of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. Or it might be something else entirely, unrelated, a coincidence of timing in an empty stretch of ocean. Because here's the part that still bothers investigators over 60 years later. When ships finally reached that patch of ocean, they found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no fuel slick, no bodies, nothing at all. An aircraft carrying more than 100 people simply stopped existing somewhere over the Pacific, and to this day, the United States government has never been able to tell you why. To understand who was on that plane, you have to understand what March of 1962 actually looked like in America. Vietnam wasn't a household word yet. There was no draft lottery on the evening news, no protests filling college campuses, none of the cultural weight that word would carry just a few years later. In 1962, the United States had a few thousand military advisors quietly embedded in South Vietnam, training the South Vietnamese army, officially not fighting a war at all. 93 of the men boarding Flight 739 were part of that quiet buildup. They were Army communications specialists, trained in things like coded radio transmission and battlefield electronics, heading to Saigon to relieve soldiers who'd already been there for months. Most of them had gone through a grueling training pipeline that included jungle and ranger-style instruction. These weren't green recruits. They were some of the best trained communications men the Army had, hand-picked for a job that required precision under pressure. Picture what that morning at Travis Air Force Base probably looked like. 93 young men, most of them barely out of their teens or in their early 20s, boarding a plane for a country most of them had never heard of a year earlier. Some had wives who'd driven them to the base that morning. Some had parents who wouldn't get a letter for weeks and wouldn't think much of the silence, because that's just how mail worked overseas in 1962. None of them had any reason to think this flight was any different from 100 other routine transport flights the military ran every single week. The flight itself wasn't even a military plane. It was a civilian charter, operated by a company called Flying Tiger Line, a cargo and charter airline named after the famous World War II volunteer pilots, flying under contract with the Military Air Transport Service. The aircraft was a Lockheed Super Constellation, a big 4-engine propeller plane with a long, reliable service history. There was nothing about this flight that should have made history. Flight 739 lifted off from Travis Air Force Base in California, and the route ahead of it was a classic mid-century Pacific crossing, a series of island hops that fuel-limited propeller aircraft needed to make in the 1960s, long before non-stop trans-Pacific jets were the norm. Every one of those stops was, in hindsight, one step closer to the moment nobody saw coming. First stop, Honolulu, routine. Then onward to Wake Island, a tiny speck of coral reef in the middle of nowhere that exists almost entirely because planes need somewhere to refuel. Then Guam, a U.S. territory and a major American military hub in the Western Pacific. From Guam, the plan was one more short hop to Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and then finally down into Saigon. 3 stops down, 1 left to go. Every leg of this journey went off without a hitch. No mechanical issues reported, no weather problems. The 11-member civilian crew, pilots, flight engineers, navigators, and stewardesses, all experienced, moved this aircraft across thousands of miles of open ocean without a single red flag. They took off from Guam at 12:57 Greenwich Mean Time on March 16th, climbing to a cruising altitude of 18,000 feet for what should have been the final leg of the entire trip. 8 minutes into that final leg, the crew radioed in their position. Routine, calm, precisely what you'd expect from a flight that had already crossed most of the Pacific without incident. At 14:22 Greenwich Mean Time, they radioed in again. Still on schedule, still nothing unusual. This would be the last time anyone ever heard from Flight 739. Guam's control tower expected the next scheduled check-in at 15:30 Greenwich Mean Time. When it didn't come in, nobody panicked immediately. There was heavy radio static that night, interference from another aircraft on a nearby frequency, and static delays happened. It wasn't unusual enough to trigger alarm right away, but by 15:39 Greenwich Mean Time, when controllers finally cleared the interference and tried again, they got nothing back. Dead air. They tried the aircraft's call sign over and over. Nothing. Around that same window of time, roughly 90 minutes after that final routine radio call, the crew of a standard oil tanker called the SS Lenzen, sailing through that same stretch of ocean, looked up and witnessed the moment this story opened with. 5 separate crew members on that tanker gave matching accounts of what they saw, right down to small details like the color of the light and the order the 2 objects fell in. The location they reported lined up almost perfectly with where Flight 739 should have been at that exact moment in its flight path. If that tanker crew really did witness this aircraft's final seconds, then somewhere over the open Pacific, in the space of what was probably only a few seconds, a 4-engine airliner carrying 107 people came apart in the sky. Within hours, the U.S. military launched what would become, at that time, one of the largest air and sea search operations ever conducted in the Pacific Ocean. Aircraft and ships from 4 separate branches, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard, converged on the search zone. Over the course of 8 straight days, dozens of planes and multiple surface vessels combed more than 200,000 square miles of open water. To put that in perspective, that's an area larger than the entire state of California. Pilots flew grid patterns for hours at a time, scanning empty swells for anything that didn't belong. A scrap of aluminum, an oil sheen, a life vest, anything. They searched the coordinates the tanker crew had reported. They searched the projected flight path based on the aircraft's last known speed and heading. They searched wider and wider rings outward from both points, in case wind or ocean currents had carried debris further than expected in the days since the disappearance. 8 days, 4 military branches. An area the size of a state, scoured inch by men who knew precisely what they were looking for and understood exactly how badly the families back home needed them to find it. They found nothing. Not a life jacket, not a seat cushion, not an oil slick, not a single piece of wreckage large enough to identify. In an ocean disappearance, some kind of debris field almost always turns up eventually, even if it takes years. In this case, nothing ever has. Not in 1962, and not in the 60-plus years since. Here's where this story gets genuinely strange, and where you need to know precisely what's confirmed fact versus what's suspicion, because I'm not going to blur that line for you. On that exact same day, March 16, 1962, a second Flying Tiger Line aircraft, also flying under military charter, also carrying sensitive cargo, also departed Travis Air Force Base and experienced serious in-flight difficulties of its own several hours later. 2 aircraft from the same airline, on the same route structure, running into catastrophic trouble on the same calendar day. Flying Tiger Line's own executives publicly called this an extraordinary coincidence. Then investigators found something else. At Guam, during the refueling stop before that final fatal leg, Flight 739 had sat unattended on the ramp for an extended period in a dimly lit area without meaningful security. According to the official investigation, essentially anyone could have walked up to that aircraft while it sat there. Flying Tiger Line's own vice president told reporters at the time that it was essentially impossible for a super constellation to simply explode during normal flight operations. That whatever happened, something violent must have happened. The company publicly raised the possibility of sabotage or even a kidnapping. They also admitted, just as publicly, that they had zero hard evidence to prove any of it. That's the honest state of this theory. A suspicious pattern, an unsecured aircraft, a company's own executives suggesting foul play, but no confirmed bomb. no confirmed saboteur, and no proof strong enough to satisfy an official investigation. The Civil Aeronautics Board spent months on this case. Their final report is almost unsettling in how carefully it avoids certainty. They concluded that the evidence, taken as a whole, suggested the aircraft was likely destroyed in flight, probably some kind of explosion, consistent with what the tanker crew described. But because no wreckage was ever recovered, they stated plainly that they could not determine with any real confidence whether the cause was mechanical and structural failure or something deliberate. The official, final government conclusion on Flight 739 reads almost word for word like this: all occupants presumed dead, and no probable cause can be determined. That sentence has never changed since 1962, not in the decades since. Not with better technology, not with declassified files, not with renewed interest. Flight 739 remains, officially, one of American aviation's genuinely open cases. For the families of those 93 soldiers, there was no funeral with a body, no folded flag over a coffin, just a telegram, and then years, decades, of almost nothing to hold on to. Because this flight technically predates the period the U.S. government formally recognizes as the start of American combat losses in Vietnam, some of these men's names weren't even included on official casualty counts for that war for years. Their families have spent decades fighting simply to have their sons, husbands, and brothers formally acknowledged as some of the earliest American losses of a war that would go on to define an entire generation. Some of those families are still alive today. Sons and daughters who never really knew their fathers, only knew them through photographs and a folded telegram kept in a drawer somewhere. Wives who remarried decades later, but still, every March, think about a specific date. For most of them, there was never a grave to visit. No headstone with a name on it, just an ocean and a government report that ends with the word undetermined. That's the part that's easy to miss in a story built around a mystery. These men didn't just lose their lives somewhere over an anonymous stretch of the Pacific. For a long time, their own country's records barely acknowledged they'd been part of that war at all. Here's what sits with me about this one. We know almost precisely where this happened. A set of coordinates, a specific hour, a specific minute. We know what a ship full of witnesses says they saw happen to it. And after 60+ years, after one of the largest search operations in Pacific history, after a formal federal investigation, we still don't know why. 93 men who trained for months to serve their country boarded a plane in California expecting to land in Saigon, and instead became one of history's cleanest disappearances. No wreckage has ever surfaced. No definitive cause has ever been confirmed. The Pacific Ocean is still, quite literally, the only witness that matters. And it's not talking. So here's what I want to know. If you were one of those 93 soldiers, trained, ready, thousands of miles from home, boarding what was supposed to be just another routine leg of a long trip, do you think you'd have had any sense at all that something was wrong? Or do you think it really did happen that fast, that quietly, with zero warning? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. Follow the Ink Vault. We go where others don't.